Have you ever looked into the eyes of a wild animal and felt understood? Not feared, not threatened, but seen completely. This is the story of a man who vanished into the most unforgiving corner of the world to escape his pain and returned with something no one could explain. It begins in the frozen heart of the Arctic, where silence stretches for miles and the cold doesn't just bite, it breaks. A place where few survive and even fewer return. But in that silence, surrounded by snow and solitude, Elias found something, or someone, that would change his life forever. This is not just a tale of survival. It's a story of connection beyond species, of trust forged in blizzards, and of a mysterious pack of white wolves who defied everything we thought we knew about the wild. They weren't just animals. They were guardians, guides, heroes with fur and fangs. What happened out there was more than chance. It was destiny. A moment where the line between man and nature blurred, and healing came on four legs. This is Giants of Ice, the return of the white wolves. In the heart of the Arctic Circle, where daylight fades into weeks of twilight and snow blankets the earth like a silent shroud, lived a man named Elias Thorne. He wasn't always a recluse. Once, he was a celebrated wildlife photographer, known for capturing rare and majestic creatures in their natural habitat. But time had taken its toll. After the sudden loss of his wife 3 winters ago, Elias abandoned city life and retreated to an isolated cabin far from civilization. He sought solace in the stillness of the ice and snow, far from the noise of grief that never truly left him. Each day blended into the next, a monotonous cycle of chopping wood, melting snow for water, and enduring the biting cold that never showed mercy. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional howl of distant wolves or the creak of ice underfoot. Elias, though seasoned in solitude, had begun to feel its weight pressing down heavier with each passing winter. There were days he wouldn't speak a word out loud, his only company the photographs of animals from a past life and the memory of laughter that no longer echoed in his cabin. He had heard stories from local Inuit elders about the legendary Giants of Ice, a rare pack of massive white wolves believed to be guardians of the North. Some claimed they were spirits, others swore they had seen them in the storm, eyes glowing like lanterns in the dark. Elias never put much stock in those tales. As a man of science and survival, he chalked them up to folklore, born from long nights and ancient fear. Yet, deep down, a small part of him, the part that still believed in wonder, hoped the legends were true. Food was growing scarce, and with the nearest town nearly 200 kilometers away, every failed hunting trip meant another day of tightening his belt. One especially brutal morning, as he tracked a lone caribou through the frostbitten forest, Elias slipped on a patch of hidden ice and tumbled into a shallow ravine. The fall wasn't deadly, but left his leg twisted badly, and his pride wounded deeper than any bruise. Crawling back to his cabin, every movement a battle against pain and snowdrifts, he realized just how vulnerable he truly was. That night, alone by the dying fire, Elias stared into the flames with a gnawing realization. He wouldn't survive the season in this state. Isolation had once been his sanctuary, now it was his cage. As the storm picked up outside, he felt something primal stir in his chest. A whisper, maybe even a plea, sent into the howling winds. He didn't know it yet, but something or someone had heard it. 3 days passed since the fall, and Elias's condition had worsened. His leg had swollen and turned shades of purple, making it nearly impossible to move beyond the confines of his cabin. The food supply was down to half a jar of dried berries and 1 frozen rabbit, which he rationed carefully. The cold seemed crueler than usual, creeping into every corner of the cabin, testing his endurance. On the 3rd night, with the wind howling like a banshee and the fire struggling to stay alive, Elias felt closer to giving up than ever before. He drifted into a fevered sleep, half delirious from pain and hunger. But just before dawn, something changed. A strange sound stirred him awake, not the wind, nor the creaking of the walls, but a low, rhythmic crunching, like paws pressing into snow. Then came a howl, low and resonant, so close it vibrated through the wooden floor beneath him. Elias pulled himself toward the window and peered through the frost-glazed glass. At first, he saw nothing but white. But then, emerging from the storm like ghostly silhouettes, came a group of massive white wolves. Their coats shimmered under the moonlight, and their eyes, piercing, intelligent, and eerily human, locked onto him. It was them, the giants of ice. Panic surged through him. Wolves rarely approached human dwellings, and even less in packs like this. Was this how it would end? Torn apart by predators, too weak to defend himself? But something held Elias back from grabbing the rifle resting by the door. The wolves made no sound. They didn't bare their teeth or circle the cabin. The largest of them, a male with a scar tracing down his left eye, stepped forward and sat just outside the door, staring at the wood as if waiting. Elias watched, heart pounding, as the creature tilted its head and then lay down. Against every survival instinct he'd ever learned, Elias opened the door just a crack. The cold rushed in instantly, burning his skin. But the wolves didn't move. They simply watched him, calm, still, unafraid. The leader met Elias's eyes and blinked slowly, deliberately, as though trying to communicate. And then, without warning, the wolves turned and began to walk away. Slowly, not fleeing, not stalking, but leading. One by one, they disappeared into the trees, only to stop and glance back, urging him forward. It was absurd, but Elias felt a pull stronger than reason. Driven by a mix of curiosity and desperation, Elias wrapped himself in every fur and lair he could find, braced a makeshift crutch under his arm, and followed them into the storm. Every step was agony, but something deep in his gut told him this wasn't a trap, it was a lifeline. The wolves kept their pace slow, always glancing back to make sure he followed. And somewhere beneath the pain and frostbite, a spark reignited inside him. This was no ordinary night. This was a calling, a moment of destiny. Elias followed the wolves deep into the frozen wilderness, further than he dared to travel in years. The cold was brutal, biting at his exposed skin, but the wolves moved with a graceful certainty, guiding him like ancient spirits across the snow. The alpha, the scarred male, would occasionally pause and wait, his gaze fixed on Elias, as if silently urging him to keep going. Hours passed like a dream, and just when Elias felt he could go no further, the pack stopped near a massive outcrop of ice-covered stone. Nestled in its base was a hollow, a den, shielded from the wind and almost warm compared to the open tundra. Without hesitation, the wolves entered the den. Elias crawled in behind them, collapsing onto the frost-hardened ground. Inside, he could see pups, 3 of them, tiny and nestled against one of the females. They blinked at him with innocent curiosity, not fear. The wolves had brought him not just to shelter, but into their sanctuary. It defied all logic. These were wild creatures, apex predators, yet they had accepted his presence, even protected him. Elias couldn't explain it, but he no longer felt like an intruder. He felt like he belonged. Over the days that followed, Elias remained in the den, his legs slowly beginning to recover thanks to the warmth and stillness. The wolves hunted and returned with meat, sometimes dropping it near him, as if offering a share. He began to eat what they brought, his strength returning bite by bite. The pups played near him without fear, tumbling over his boots and nipping gently at his gloves. The female even curled beside him on the coldest nights, her body heat saving him from the chill that threatened to steal his breath. The bond was growing, not just of survival, but of something deeper. Elias began to observe the wolves closely. Each had a personality, the alpha, stern and watchful, the mother, nurturing but bold, the younger males, curious and protective of the pups. He started sketching them with charcoal on spare paper scraps from his journal, each line breathing new life into a purpose he thought he'd lost. In those quiet moments, Elias began to speak again, softly at first, narrating his sketches, telling stories from his past. The wolves listened, or at least they stayed, and somehow that was enough. Then came a moment that proved this connection was more than coincidence. One evening, as the sky turned a bruised violet and a storm gathered on the horizon, a low growl rippled through the den. The wolves stood, tense. Something was out there. Elias followed their gaze and saw, in the far distance, a shadow moving across the ridge, a bear. Starving, massive, and wandering far from its territory. Elias reached for the flare gun tucked into his coat, a relic from his early expeditions. As the bear crept closer, Elias aimed into the sky and fired. The flare exploded like red lightning, scaring the beast off. The wolves looked back at him, silent. The trust between them had been sealed. The storm rolled in fast that night, swallowing the sky with heavy clouds and dumping sheets of snow that threatened to bury the den. Elias had seen many Arctic storms in his life, but this one felt different, angrier, more relentless. The wolves huddled together, forming a wall of warmth around the pups, while Elias reinforced the small cave's entrance with fallen branches and snow blocks, using instincts he hadn't relied on in years. His leg, though still stiff, had improved enough to move with a crude cane he'd fashioned from frozen tree limb. The worst of his injury had passed, but a new kind of threat was coming. As the wind howled outside, a strange silence settled within. The alpha wolf, whom Elias had started calling Ghost, stood suddenly and sniffed the air. His ears pricked, his posture rigid. Something was wrong. Moments later, Ghost bolted out into the blizzard, followed by two of the younger wolves. Elias hesitated, then grabbed his coat and limped after them, shielding his eyes from the blinding snow. The wolves moved swiftly, and it took all his strength to keep up. Then through the whiteout he saw it, a deep crack in the ice shelf just yards from the den. The snowpack had given way, creating a sinkhole in the landscape, and one of the pups had fallen in. Panic gripped Elias's chest. He could hear the faint, desperate cries echoing from below. Ghost stood at the edge, growling anxiously, pacing. The mother wolf barked sharply from behind, unable to reach her pup. Elias didn't think, he simply acted. He dropped to his knees, secured a rope from his pack to a protruding tree root, and began lowering himself into the icy crevice. The cold was brutal, gnawing at his hands as he descended. Below, the small pup was stranded on a ledge, trembling. With every inch downward, the rope burned into his palms, but he didn't stop. When he finally reached the pup, it whined and curled against him. Elias cradled it close and secured it under his coat before signaling upward with a tug. Ghost and the other wolves instinctively pulled at the rope from above, helping haul him back to the surface inch by inch. When Elias finally emerged, soaked and frozen but alive, the mother wolf rushed forward, nuzzling the pup with urgent affection. The pack surrounded Elias, their eyes filled with something that felt unmistakably like gratitude. In that moment, the barrier between man and beast vanished entirely. That night, back in the shelter of the den, Elias didn't feel like a survivor. He felt like part of a family. The wolves lay closer than ever, forming a circle around him. And as the storm raged outside, he knew with absolute certainty they had saved him as much as he had saved them. The line between species, between instinct and empathy, had blurred into something extraordinary, something sacred, and he realized he wasn't meant to be alone anymore. When the storm finally passed, it left behind a world transformed. The once hostile landscape glittered under the rising sun, snowdrifts smoothed by the wind like waves frozen in time. Elias stood at the mouth of the den, leaning heavily on his cane, watching as the pack stretched and stirred around him. Something had shifted, not just in the landscape, but in him. The pain in his leg was dull now, manageable. But more than that, the hollowness that had followed him for years had finally begun to fade. In its place grew a quiet, powerful sense of belonging. The days that followed were unlike anything Elias had ever known. He moved with the pack, slowly at first but steadily, learning their rhythms, their silent language, their ways of reading the wind. He had always observed animals from behind a lens, but now he was part of the frame. The wolves didn't treat him as prey, nor as a threat. He had become something in between, a companion, a protector, a member of their world. The pups no longer feared him. They followed him, climbed on him, even slept against him like he was one of their own. One morning, Ghost approached Elias and nudged his hand, then turned and trotted into the open snow. Elias understood immediately it was time. The pack was moving on, following ancient paths mapped by instinct and memory. Elias had a choice to make. He stood for a long time, heart heavy. The bond he had with them was unlike anything he'd experienced since losing his wife, perhaps stronger in its own mysterious way. But he knew he couldn't stay in the wild forever. His body, though healing, wasn't built for the long haul. Still, he wasn't the same man who had once sought solitude in this frozen prison. With great reluctance, he began to walk back towards civilization, tears freezing to his cheeks as he watched the wolves fade into the distance. But just as he reached the ridge, he turned and saw a ghost standing there watching. The great wolf gave one solemn nod, almost human in its meaning, and then vanished into the white. That image would stay with Elias for the rest of his life. A final goodbye, or perhaps a promise that they'd meet again, somewhere beyond the ice. Months later, Elias returned to the world. He carried a limp and a frostbitten hand, but also a fire in his eyes that hadn't been there in years. He began writing again, not just journals or articles, but a full book. Giants of Ice, he titled it. A story of rescue and rebirth, of animal miracles and human healing. He gave talks, shared his sketches, even started a small wildlife rescue fund in honor of the wolves. But the most common question people asked him was the same: did it really happen? And he'd always smile and say, every word, I lived it. But a part of him knew that even if no one believed it, the truth was in his heart, and in the eyes of the pack that saved him. Some stories stay with you not because of their danger or drama, but because of their depth. Because they reveal a truth we often forget, that animals aren't just creatures of instinct. They feel, they protect, and sometimes they save us when we can't save ourselves. Elias walked into the Arctic to escape life, but what he found was something far more powerful than isolation. He found healing in the eyes of a predator. He found family in the unlikeliest of places. And in that frozen silence, he was reminded of what it means to trust, to love, and to be alive again. Maybe you've lost something, or someone. Maybe you've felt like giving up. If this story shows us anything, it's that sometimes the universe sends help in most unexpected forms. Sometimes a hero comes with paws instead of hands. And sometimes a pack of wolves is exactly what your soul needs to remember how to fight. So if this story touched you, if it made you pause, made you feel something, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, like it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss the next incredible journey. Because the world is full of animal miracles, heroic pets, and emotional rescue stories. And we're just getting started.